She looked like every neighborhood coffee shop owner you'd ever seen. Dark hair streaked with silver, laugh lines around kind eyes, hands stained with espresso and flour from 14 years of making the perfect cup and the warmest welcome in downtown Portland. Elena Vasquez knew every regular customer's name, their drink preferences, their family stories, and their daily struggles. Her small cafe served as unofficial neighborhood headquarters, a place where college students studied, elderly couples shared quiet breakfasts, and young women found their first jobs in a safe, supportive environment. But when four men in expensive suits walked in with plans to transform her sanctuary into a front for human trafficking, they awakened something that had been sleeping behind her gentle smile for over a decade. What they discovered would remind everyone that the most dangerous protectors are often the ones who've chosen to nurture instead of destroy. Welcome to Human Stories. Before we begin this incredible tale of maternal fury and hidden warfare, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. If you believe everyday heroes deserve recognition, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who fight darkness from the most unlikely places. Café Luna sat on the corner of 3rd and Morrison like a warm beacon in downtown Portland's urban landscape. Through its large windows, passers-by could see the glow of Edison bulb fixtures, the rich mahogany of handcrafted tables, and the constant movement of people who had found something more valuable than good coffee. They had found community. Elena Vasquez had opened the cafe 14 years ago with her late husband, Miguel, transforming a defunct laundromat into the kind of neighborhood gathering place that cities needed, but rarely created intentionally. The couple had invested their life savings, countless hours of manual labor, and a shared vision of creating space where people could connect in an increasingly disconnected world. The cafe reflected Elena's personality in every detail. Mismatched vintage chairs that invited long conversations, bookshelves lined with novels that customers could borrow freely, a bulletin board covered with local job postings, apartment listings, and community event announcements. And behind the espresso machine, Elena herself, 53 years old, 5 feet 2 inches of unlimited energy, greeting every customer like a friend returning home. But Café Luna was more than a business. It was Elena's mission. Over the years, she had made it policy to hire young women who needed more than employment. They needed safety, stability, and someone who believed in their potential. College students struggling with tuition, recent immigrants learning English, young mothers trying to balance work with childcare, women escaping abusive relationships who required patient employers and flexible schedules. Currently, Elena employed 6 women whose stories would have broken most people's hearts. Maria Santos, 19, had aged out of foster care with no family support and was working her way through community college while living in Elena's spare apartment above the cafe. Jennifer Kim, 22, was supporting her disabled mother while pursuing a nursing degree. Sarah Williams, 24, had fled an abusive marriage with her 3-year-old daughter and was rebuilding her life one shift at a time. To customers, these young women were simply friendly baristas who remembered drink orders and asked about your day. To Elena, they were daughters she had chosen to protect, nurture, and empower. She paid them above minimum wage, provided health insurance she could barely afford, and created work schedules that accommodated school, family obligations, and personal crises. Elena's background made her uniquely qualified for this role, though no one who knew her as the neighborhood coffee shop owner would have suspected the depth of her experience with protecting vulnerable women. Before she became the nurturing presence behind Café Luna's espresso machine, Elena had been Captain Elena Vasquez, United States Army Military Police Corps. For 16 years, she had served in positions that included base security, criminal investigation, and specialized assignments involving human trafficking interdiction in locations where American military personnel were stationed overseas. Her final assignment had been in Germany, where she had commanded a joint task force focused on dismantling trafficking networks that targeted American servicewomen and local civilian populations. Elena had developed expertise in recognizing trafficking operations, understanding victim psychology, and conducting investigations that required both tactical capability and deep empathy for trauma survivors. The work had been successful but emotionally devastating. Elena had saved dozens of women from situations that would have destroyed them. But the constant exposure to human evil had left her questioning whether she could continue fighting darkness without becoming dark herself. When Miguel suggested they return to Portland and open a small business together, Elena had seen it as an opportunity to continue protecting vulnerable women using love and opportunity rather than law enforcement and prosecution. The cafe became her new mission, a place where young women could find safety, support, and the kind of maternal guidance that prevented them from becoming vulnerable to predators in the first place. For 14 years, the strategy had been successful. Elena had helped dozens of young women complete their education, escape dangerous situations, and build stable lives. None of them had ever learned about her military background or specialized training. They knew her simply as Elena, the woman who made perfect lattes and somehow always knew exactly what you needed to hear on difficult days. But some skills, once learned, never completely disappear. They just wait quietly until circumstances make them necessary again. Tuesday afternoon brought typical October weather to Portland. Light rain that kept tourists away but created the perfect atmosphere for locals who appreciated the cafe's warmth and community. Elena was training Maria Santos on advanced latte art techniques, while Jennifer Kim handled the afternoon rush of students and office workers seeking caffeine and refuge from the dampness outside. Elena noticed them immediately when they entered at 3:47 p.m. 4 men in expensive suits that didn't quite fit, moving with the kind of coordinated awareness that suggested professional rather than casual association. They were well-dressed but wrong. Their clothing was too new, their posture too alert, their eyes scanning the cafe layout with the systematic attention of people conducting surveillance rather than seeking refreshment. Elena's military training activated automatically, cataloging details while maintaining her normal customer service routine. The leader was approximately 40 years old, average height, with the kind of confidence that came from wielding power over others. His companions positioned themselves strategically throughout the cafe, one near the entrance, one with clear sightlines to the back office, one where he could observe both employee work areas and customer interactions. Classic positioning for either security or intimidation. Given the expensive suits and professional coordination, Elena suspected the latter. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she said warmly, approaching their table with the same friendly energy she brought to every customer interaction. "What can I get you today?" The leader smiled, but it was the kind of expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, we're not here for coffee. We're here to discuss a business proposition." Elena's internal threat assessment escalated immediately. Legitimate business propositions were scheduled during business hours, conducted in offices, and involved people who introduced themselves and presented credentials. Men who appeared unannounced and referred to vague propositions typically represented problems rather than opportunities. "I appreciate your interest," Elena replied professionally, "but I'm not looking to expand or make changes to the cafe. We're quite happy with our current operations." "I don't think you understand," the man continued, his voice carrying an edge that made nearby customers unconsciously move away from his table. "This isn't really optional. You see, your location has certain advantages that make it valuable for operations that extend beyond coffee service." Elena glanced around the cafe, noting the positions of her employees and customers while calculating response options. Maria was behind the espresso machine, within sight but potentially vulnerable if the situation escalated. Jennifer was at the register, equally exposed. 8 customers were scattered throughout the seating area, all civilians who would become complications if violence occurred. "What kind of operations?" Elena asked quietly, moving slightly to position herself between the men and her employees. The leader's smile widened, becoming genuinely predatory. "Let's just say we're in the business of helping young women find opportunities." that take advantage of their natural talents. Your establishment employs exactly the kind of women we're looking for, and your location provides convenient access to transportation networks. Elena felt the cold weight of recognition settling in her chest. These men weren't interested in her café. They were interested in her employees. They had identified Café Luna as a potential recruitment ground for trafficking operations, viewing the young women she protected as inventory for criminal enterprise. I see, Elena said evenly. And what would this partnership involve? Simple arrangement, the man explained, apparently interpreting her question as interest rather than intelligence gathering. We provide financial compensation for your cooperation in identifying suitable candidates. You maintain your normal operations while facilitating our recruitment process. Everyone benefits. Except the young women. The man's expression hardened slightly. The young women receive opportunities they couldn't access otherwise. Travel, financial independence, freedom from the kind of dead-end situations that keep them trapped in places like this. Elena had heard this language before during her military service in Germany. The sanitized vocabulary that trafficking organizations used to disguise forced prostitution, debt bondage, and sexual slavery as career opportunities. The careful phrasing that made exploitation sound like empowerment while targeting the most vulnerable members of society. What if I'm not interested in this partnership? Elena asked. The leader glanced toward his associates, who shifted position slightly, not threatening, but enough to remind Elena that she was outnumbered, and that this conversation could escalate beyond words if necessary. Mrs. Vasquez, he said, using her name for the first time and confirming that they had researched her background, you've built something beautiful here. It would be unfortunate if circumstances forced you to reconsider your business model. The threat was clear, delivered with the kind of casual confidence that suggested these men were accustomed to compliance and rarely encountered resistance. They had probably approached dozens of similar businesses using the same combination of financial incentives and implied consequences to recruit cooperation from business owners who couldn't afford to refuse. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They assumed that Elena Vasquez was simply a coffee shop owner whose primary concerns were profit margins and personal safety. They had no idea they were threatening someone who had spent 16 years in the United States Army, specializing in exactly the kind of criminal enterprise they represented. Elena excused herself to prepare their order, coffee they hadn't requested but which provided her with time to think and opportunity to observe their behavior when they believed they weren't being watched. She moved to the espresso machine with practiced efficiency while her mind shifted into the tactical analysis mode that had served her during military operations in far more dangerous environments. 4 subjects, coordinated but not military trained. Professional criminal organization, likely with experience in intimidation and coercion, but accustomed to compliance rather than resistance. Armed status unknown but probable given their confidence and positioning. Backup support uncertain but likely available given the systematic nature of their approach. Elena's primary concerns were immediate: protecting her employees and customers from escalation, gathering intelligence about their organization, and determining whether this was an isolated approach or part of a larger pattern targeting multiple businesses. Elena? Maria Santos approached the espresso machine, keeping her voice low. Those men at table 6. Something feels wrong about them. Elena glanced at the 19-year-old who had become like a daughter to her, noting the intuitive fear that young women developed when predators were near. Maria's instincts were accurate. These men represented exactly the kind of danger that Elena had spent years helping women recognize and avoid. I know, sweetheart, Elena replied quietly while steaming milk with movements that appeared normal, but positioned her with clear sight lines to all 4 men. I need you to do something for me. Take Jennifer and go to the back office. Tell her it's time for inventory review. Elena, what's happening? Probably nothing serious, Elena said, projecting calm confidence while internally calculating response protocols. But I want you and Jennifer somewhere safe while I handle this business discussion. Maria nodded, trusting in someone who had never failed to protect her. She moved to the register and whispered to Jennifer, who glanced toward the table of suited men with growing concern before both young women disappeared into the back office. Elena finished preparing coffee and approached the table with the same friendly professionalism she brought to every customer interaction. But her awareness had shifted to the hyper-alert state that had kept her alive during military operations, where mistakes meant casualties. "Gentlemen," she said, setting down cups they hadn't ordered, "I've given your proposition some thought." "Excellent," the leader replied. "I hoped you'd see the practical advantages of cooperation." Elena sat down across from him, positioning herself to maintain visual contact with his associates while keeping her hands free for rapid response if necessary. "Before we proceed, I need to understand the scope of your operation. How many other businesses in Portland are part of this partnership?" The leader's eyes showed satisfaction at what he interpreted as negotiation rather than interrogation. "We maintain relationships with several establishments throughout the Pacific Northwest. Coffee shops, restaurants, retail businesses, anywhere young women seek employment opportunities." "And how many women have you successfully recruited through these partnerships?" "Dozens," he said with obvious pride. "We provide transportation to cities where opportunities are more significant. San Francisco, Los Angeles, Las Vegas. Places where young women with the right attitude can earn substantial income." Elena had heard these euphemisms before during briefings about trafficking networks that moved victims between cities to prevent them from establishing support systems or becoming familiar with local law enforcement. The opportunities he described were positions in forced prostitution, where women became debt slaves controlled through violence and psychological manipulation. "What kind of income are we discussing?" Elena asked, continuing to gather intelligence while projecting interest in financial details. "Our associates typically earn several $1,000s per month," the leader explained. "Much more than they could make serving coffee or working retail jobs. And the work is not difficult, for women who understand how to make men happy." Elena felt the familiar cold rage that had motivated her throughout her military career, the absolute fury that came from hearing predators describe sexual exploitation as career advancement. But she maintained her expression of neutral interest while continuing to gather operational intelligence. "How do you ensure the women remain motivated to continue these opportunities?" The leader's smile became genuinely predatory. "We provide comprehensive support services, housing, transportation, personal security. Once women join our organization, they rarely need to concern themselves with independent decision-making. Translation: debt bondage, geographical isolation, and psychological control designed to prevent escape. Classic trafficking methodology that Elena had studied extensively during her military service and had seen firsthand during operations in Germany." "I see," Elena said quietly. "And what happens to women who decide these opportunities aren't suitable for their goals?" For the first time, the leader's expression showed something other than confident professionalism. "That's rarely an issue. We're very careful about recruiting women who are committed to long-term success." Elena understood the implication. Women who attempted to leave the organization faced consequences severe enough to discourage similar decisions by others. The trafficking network maintained control through fear as much as financial dependence. She had gathered enough intelligence to understand the scope of the threat and the urgency of response. This wasn't an isolated criminal approach. It was part of a systematic operation targeting vulnerable young women throughout the Pacific Northwest, using legitimate businesses as recruitment fronts. And they had made the mistake of targeting her employees, her chosen daughters, the young women she had sworn to protect. Some lines, once crossed, activated responses that had been dormant for over a decade but had never truly disappeared. Elena stood up from the table with the same unhurried movement she used when refilling coffee dispensers or wiping down tables. To casual observation, she appeared to be a business owner politely concluding a meeting, but her positioning had shifted to something that would have been recognizable to anyone with military training. She had placed herself at optimal distance for neutralizing multiple threats, while maintaining access to both communication and improvised weapons. "Gentlemen," she said in her normal customer service voice, "I appreciate your offer, but I'm going to have to decline your partnership opportunity." The leader's expression shifted from satisfaction to surprise to annoyance. "Mrs. Vasquez, I don't think you fully understand the advantages of cooperation versus the disadvantages of refusal." "Actually," Elena replied, her voice carrying a new quality that made several customers look up from their laptops and conversations, "I understand exactly what you're offering and exactly what you're threatening, and I need you to leave my cafe immediately."